Youngins, this reminds me of 2008. This campaign has gone from a baton memorial death march to a flash mob. The momentum is real. The Midwesternness of Governor Walz is at an 11, and Trump is at his most Trumpiest. This is kind of fun. So let's talk about what we can do to keep it that way through November. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join a majority. This is Majority 54. Ravi, this is exciting.
Yeah, it is. Let's go right to the rally from yesterday. I don't know if you watched it. I watched the whole thing. It was as energetic as anything I've seen before. Let's give our audience a taste of what it was like.
Actually, wait, we don't have that clip quite yet. They're just telling us they don't have it. So you tell us, and then we'll have it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was incredible. So you had Shapiro started off, right? So everybody's wondering, is Shapiro gonna be sour? Was something we'll talk about. He gave a pretty rousing speech and a pretty enthusiastic endorsement of both Walz and Harris. Then Harris gave a pretty, a pretty standard stump speech to begin with, and then went through Walz's record. The crowd was going absolutely crazy, and then Walz got up and gave a pretty extended speech, both about his background and then about the frame of the race. And I thought it was like, all right, I could see this working.
Yeah, I will admit, I had a crazy busy day yesterday. I didn't get to see it at all. So I've done that thing where I've only experienced it through the reaction on social media. But I would say it is pretty positive. When you compare the vibe of the Democratic Party writ large, say a month ago to now, it's not even like you could say there is more momentum now. It's like there's a campaign happening now.
For sure.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and actually let's give people just a sense of what this messaging looks like. There was I don't know how they did this so fast, but they almost immediately after picking Walz put out a biographical ad about his sort of record, and it's quite eclectic. Let's go to this clip.
Sometimes life is as much about the lessons you learn as the lessons you teach. When I grew up, community was a way of life. My high school class was 24 people. I was related to half of them. I learned to be generous towards my neighbors, compromise without compromising my values, and work for the common good. My dad was in the Army, and with his encouragement, I joined the Army National Guard when I was 17. I served for 24 years. I used my GI benefits to go to college and become a public school teacher. I coached football and taught social studies for 20 years. And I tried to teach my students what small-town Nebraska taught me: respect, compromise, service to country. And so when I went into government, that's what I carried with me. I worked with Republicans to pass an infrastructure bill, cut taxes for working families, signed paid leave into law. I codified abortion rights after Roe got overturned. Because I go to work for the common good. But enough about me. Let's talk about you. Because that's what this election is about. It's about your future. It's about your family. And Vice President Harris knows that. She too grew up in a middle-class family. She too goes to work every day, making sure families can not just get by, but get ahead. We believe in the promise of America, in those values I learned in Nebraska, and we're ready to fight for them. Because as Kamala Harris says, when we fight, we win.
Okay, so this is really good.
Yeah, let me tell you, on Monday, I was like, you know what? I finished a bunch of big projects. I'm going to be the proactive media guy now, and I'm going to cut my Shapiro video a day early. So when we announce Shapiro, I'm going to get it out there. We're redoing our YouTube, doing more YouTube stuff. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to get ahead of stuff now. I'm not just going to do it when it happens. So I did all day. I wrote an article. I did a video, I got a podcast. So Jason, if you want to talk about Shapiro today, I am ready to talk about it, and we'll get to it. Actually, I do think that work is something I can actually explain to you a little bit about why I think she didn't pick Shapiro after spending a day on that. But then I did this 180, and I was like going into Walz's record and knowing absolutely nothing. This is going to seem like a weird joke. I was joking to somebody a couple of weeks ago. I was doing something on Balkan history, and I was like, you could tell me anything about the Balkan history for Balkan countries, and it would be like Lord of the Rings, like Game of Thrones. Like, I know nothing. You could tell me anything, and I would believe it. That was Walz. Like, as I was reading, I'm like, wait a minute, this guy did what? He was the coach of a team that hadn't won, and turned them into state champions. He's at 20 years teaching. It's just like his background is so textured and inspiring and different in politics. I was truly, and one of the things that's rare in politics, I was truly surprised. Like, I truly did not realize this guy existed.
Yeah, it's sort of like I want to say that the textured background of Tim Walz is like, if you went into had an AI create like the perfect VP candidate for Kamala, but that undersells that his greatest selling point is that he's just super real,
Yeah.
So I mean, is that how genuine the guy is and how genuine he comes across. So I mean, yeah, because you would say, oh, we'd like him to have been a reservist, a guardsman for over 20 years. We'd like him to have been a teacher. Oh, how about a football coach? Oh, all these things. Oh, yeah. And we'd like him to come from the middle of the country, but have this sterling progressive record as a governor, right? Like, that's what you would want. And you'd be like, okay, this is Aaron Sorkin is posing as an AI and writing this because this isn't real. But then the added element that makes it so clearly not fiction is just the way the dude comes across. There's that one clip of him, I think, with his daughter at the state fair. And it's just like the most Midwestern dad thing you can imagine when he says like, hey, we're here at the state fair. We're going to get some corn dogs. And she's like, I'm a vegetarian. And he goes, turkey then. And she says, she was like, that's meat. And he goes, not in Minnesota. And like, it's just like, that is just oozing with Midwesternness. Because also he's not saying it in a way where he's like anti-vegetarian. He's being self-deprecating. And it's really cool. I'm actually quite excited about it.
Yeah, I was honestly I was a bit down when I first read it. I was like, all right, what happened here? Because I wasn't totally surprised it wasn't Shapiro after spending a day there. I was starting to get a little nervous about that pick. But Walz is like, what I had known about him was that he was a very liberal governor. That was what in my head I had known about him. I didn't realize he had spent all that time in Congress in Minnesota 1st District, where he was, only the second person in over a century to represent that district. He was actually one of the most. What did he say?
Second Dem, you mean?
Yeah, and he second Dem, sorry, and he was one of the most moderate members of Congress before he was a fairly liberal governor. And so in that sense, he's kind of a Rorschach test of just like, all right, well, what part of his background, and this could go either way, right? Like, he could be defined by the right or by others. There are definitely elements of his background that would lend him to being painted as a moderate or even a conservative Democrat. And then there are elements of his background most recently where he was a fairly progressive governor. He is an eclectic character. I'm not sure I fully understand his career yet. Like, obviously I'm not too far into this exercise, and I'm genuinely curious just watching him on the national stage.
When I think about the sort of ideological evolution that tracks, it kind of makes sense in a way, right? I mean, like, when you think about the journey the rest of us have gone on, look, for a good portion of his time as governor, Trump was president. And so there is, I think, a natural inclination to push back against a conservative presidency as a governor with more progressive policies, right? And in that time, I think in many ways, like a statewide Democrat in Minnesota probably has a lot more freedom. When you think about the history of Wellstone and people like that, people forget that in Minnesota, the Democratic Party is not the Democratic Party. It's the DFL. It's the Democratic Farm and Labor Party. It's got a real tradition of, that sort of populism. So with all that said, we've got this rally clip. Let's go to this rally clip from yesterday.
Millions of others, the GI Bill gave me a shot at a college education. My dad was a teacher. My brothers and sisters and I followed in their footsteps. 3 out of 4 of us married teachers. What we do. For nearly 20 years, I had the privilege of teaching high school social studies and coaching football. Including winning that state championship. Thank you. Don't ever close the yearbook. Don't ever. But it was my students. They encouraged me to run for office. They saw in me what I was hoping to instill in them, a commitment of common good, a belief that one person can make a difference.
When I was in the state legislature, I was on what was called the House Democratic Campaign Committee, which is like the national level. It's the DSCC or the DCCC. It's, you know, where you go out and you find candidates to run, particularly in difficult districts. And when we would go out to try and find candidates to run in rural, difficult districts, Democrats, we were always looking first and foremost before we went anywhere else for one of 3 profiles. Number one was you wanted the local veterinarian. If it was rural, a veterinarian in a rural area doesn't do what a veterinarian does in an urban area. They work on people's like farm animals and stuff. So everybody knows them and trusts them, right? Number 2, you wanted either a pediatrician or an OBGYN because you wanted the person who had either seen everybody's kids or had delivered everybody's kids. And then the number 3 was you wanted the football coach. Because those 3 professions locally meant that 1, everybody knew them, and 2, everybody understood what they did, and it just transcended partisan lines. So the football coach thing may be the most important part of Walz's background, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the fact that he spent 20 years as a teacher just says a lot about who this guy is, because he wasn't a person who was planning his life around politics. And I think that's critical here. Mm-hmm. And it's actually one of the main reasons why he just comes across a certain way. He doesn't come across as this polished politician. I think it largely works for him. He kind of entered the national scene recently when he went on Morning Joe and had that sort of extended riff about how these MAGA people are ruining Thanksgiving. And that's where that sort of weird frame came from. And there's been like this debate going on about, well, is this guy a reflection of either pressure from the left on Kamala or the fact that she's too online and that she's kind of, like overreacting to a fad? What do you say to that criticism?
Look, I think that when you build a ticket, it's not fantasy football. It's not, well, this person is going to score this many points and this person, the ticket shapes a whole message together. The team is what shapes a message, right? So when you look at Trump and Vance, who do you get to shape in there and make sense with Trump? Well, it's clear you get somebody who has declared themselves completely loyal to Trump, and that's their biggest qualification. And that then sort of reinforces what people already feel about Trump, which is he can't take criticism, that kind of thing. Then when you think about having somebody who goes well with Kamala Harris, to me, the piece that goes so perfectly with her is, I can't remember who said this, but when people said that the vibe they get from Kamala Harris is the principal of their elementary school who they liked, right? So like firm, in charge, but can also be fun. And you're not like, when she comes to your classroom, you're not like, oh no, the principal's here. You're like, oh, something special is happening. She's fun, but she's in charge. And so putting her with the football coach is kind of perfect, not to mention the fact that he has a lot of what she doesn't, right? He has a military background. It's a part of his background. He, as you mentioned, he doesn't seem like somebody who was thinking that they were going to run for office right out of college, right? And then just the fact she's from San Francisco. So let's get somebody who is like the most Midwestern politician that is available. And on top of that, you just have the individual factor that he's clearly an excellent communicator and communicates like a teacher. Communicates like he's standing in front of the classroom and wants to hold your attention and make it fun for you. So I think it actually works together really well. And it seems to me that what maybe came across and separated him from Shapiro and some of what I've read is that he was pretty candid in his interview and was like, look, I'm at the end of my career. Like, I'm not interested in, you know, I'm sure if the opportunity presents itself in 8 years, I'm sure he'll want to run for president probably, but I don't think he was planning to do that. And so I think that matters a lot. He's saying, look, I want to help the ball club. And that comes across.
Yeah. And let's get to that Shapiro piece in a second, but I want to hang on something you said about him as an educator. There was this tweet by this woman named Ginny Hogan, who tweeted, there's so many funny tweets throughout the course of the day, but she tweeted, sure, Walz and Vance could debate, or they could meet privately and Vance could open up about how he's not sure how he went down such a dark path. Then Walz could hug him, assure him everyone makes mistakes, help him drop out of the race and get his life back on track. I love the education humor.
It's perfect. But that you could see that happening.
It's absolutely true. And I actually wonder if there's a way to have a breakthrough on the stage with Vance. Like, it would be hilarious if Walz tried to have a breakthrough. Like,
he's
while
like his like his Robin Williams to his Matt Damon. Like, it's not your fault.
Just like Vance just starts bawling, just like, I'm sorry. Let's throw up another tweet. This is from Teddy Schleifer, who's kind of on the Democratic donor beat. He tweeted about $42 million raised in ActBlue in the 24 hours after the Walz election, per the New York Times tracker. It says yesterday is one of the best fundraising days ever, though not as good as the day Biden dropped out. Harris-Walz released camo hats that sold out through October. I imagine they're going to be making more of those. And I think it's an interesting place to pause, because I think there's some mocking about this. Jeremy, our producer, bought one of those hats. Those are going to be worth a lot of money. Hang on to that thing. I was thinking about this today, because people are mocking white dudes for Harris, which Walz apparently was on that call, camo hats, the idea that they would pick this guy as a way to appeal to rural voters. And I was thinking about it this morning. I'm like, at least they're trying. Like, what the hell is the Trump campaign doing? Like, what? One could argue they're going after Black voters and Hispanic voters, although on the Black voter side of things, when we get to Trump, but I mean, he's inconsistent in that effort and not fully in it, would be an understatement. But like, this is what trying looks like, this is what it looks like to try to get those voters.
Well, let me say something about the whole hunter gun owner thing. We have seen this many times in politics, where part of the virtues of a candidate who's either running or is being chosen for something seems to be stuff like, oh, well, he's a Democrat, but he's a hunter. She's a Democrat, but she's a gun owner. She's a Democrat, but she served in the military, and all these things. And too often when we see that, it really reeks of somebody who they are a politician and from a state where it was not, so they became a hunter, or so that, right? And for those of us who, or for those people who watch or listen to this show and live on the East Coast and haven't spent much time in the South of the Midwest, I think that they probably feel like people like Walz are not real. I'll be honest. Like when I ran, and I showed up to meetings for fundraisers, like in New York City, and I'm in cowboy boots, immediately people are like, oh, so you have to wear those when I'm like, well, no, these are shoes where I'm from. Some people wear these with a suit. And the assumption is that it's all theater and it's all a character. But the truth is that particularly when you get further up into the more northern part of the Midwest, the Walz profile is a very common profile. Right.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important to understand that Walz didn't become a hunter when he wanted to be governor or when he wanted to be a congressman. He didn't become pro-labor when he decided that he wanted to be vice president, right? I mean, the guy was a member of a labor union for 20 years. My point is that I know a lot of people like this. Like, I know a lot of people, you know, I'm not a hunter, but like, I grew up, my dad had guns. My dad had been a police officer. So we would go out, we would shoot pistols, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I think what a lot of people don't understand is traditionally, there are people who own guns, who hunt, who do all these things and vote Democratic. There's a lot of us.
Right.
And
well, what you're saying
is that for real.
What you're saying is you're not a hunter. You know how to stash a bear, though. We'll get
to that later.
We'll get to that.
I actually don't. I'm happy to tell you, wouldn't know how to stash a bear. But anyway, go ahead.
This reminds me of something I saw Pete Buttigieg in some kind of conversation, I think with journalists once, where he was asked about his military service, and he was like, look, the timing of it, I would ask questions. He basically was like admitting that the timing was suspicious about when he decided to do it, but he was like, but I did it. And that should mean something. And I thought it was an honest answer, but also I think creates a bit of a distinction between the profile of Pete, people like me and Pete. You know, Pete is a super version of the kind of background that I have, right? He's like, gets the scholarships, he goes to the Ivy League schools. He still has overcome his own adversity and all that, but he is a true, member of elite society. He's a Rhodes Scholar, Harvard graduate. Walz is like, I truly think this is a great direction for the party. Like, he went to Chadron State College or something, right? So it's like, I had never heard of this college. And so I was like, all right, like this, I went to Binghamton. He makes Binghamton look like MIT, and I'm like, okay, this guy is not a reflection of the elite. And actually the juxtaposition of him and a Yale Law and Wharton guy is actually fascinating to me. A Howard gal and a Chadron State guy versus a Wharton and Yale Law guy. I'm like, all right, who's the elites now?
Walz is the kind of guy who, when he gets the opportunity to introduce himself to the country in a major speech at a rally, not for political purposes, but because it's really important to him, wants you to know that he won a state championship as a high school football coach.
Right.
Because that's a really cool thing that he did, and he's super proud of it. And for most of us,
people know how hard that is.
People know how hard it is, but also, like, that's super relatable. Anybody who's ever won a state championship in anything, as a player, as a coach, no matter what age they were, they want you to know that they did. And that's just, to me, super relatable.
Well, and the juxtaposition of that, and you and I were in high school in 1999. At least I think I was. I'm not. You might have just.
Yeah, I was graduating that.
He, at the same year that he won the state championship, he was the faculty advisor to the Gay Straight Alliance. And I have to say, for the younger members of the audience, that may not seem like a big deal. 1999, we did not have a Gay Straight Alliance in my school. You could not be out and gay in my high school. I'm sorry to say.
I went to a Catholic school. That year, we had a classmate who wanted to bring his boyfriend to prom, and he was told he could not.
Yeah, that's the era we're talking about here. And I think this says more about the man than anything I read about him. Is that was not a popular thing to do. I'm sure in the area he was living in, that was a fairly controversial decision to make, and it really made a difference to the students of that school. Like, the idea that the football coach was the faculty advisor to the Gay Straight Alliance probably made all the difference. And I think that is a true reflection of the man's character. And I have to say, like, as I was going through his background yesterday, I texted you. I'll be honest with the audience. I was like, what the hell is this pick? I was going through the background, and it was at that moment when I read that I completely changed my mind about the man.
Because the other thing it signifies is that in 1999, the current governor of Minnesota was not thinking, everything I do should be choreographed so that I can run for office in Minnesota. Because in 1999 in Minnesota, that wasn't even helpful in a Democratic primary, particularly in 1999.
Remember, Barack Obama was against gay marriage, like when he first ran for office. That's how
he was against civil unions at that point in his career.
Right. So this is a true reflection of the man's character. I have actually an interesting theory about the true power of Walz. But before we get there, let's actually take a quick break because this is a mega segment. Really, we have so much more to say, and I also want to get into the why not Shapiro stuff because I have some thoughts on that as well. All of this and more when we come back. This episode is sponsored by Rhone. If you're like me, you understand the pains of finding what to wear. Most clothes are uncomfortable. They may be too tight. They never, actually fit your size because, a lot of us are not exactly small, medium, large, extra large. We're complicated. Sometimes when you find something you like, you can only wear it for a few hours before that important meeting or dinner, and then you have to change it into something else. And everyone wants to dress their best. You want to look good at all times. And frankly, it's a confidence booster. So here's the deal. Men's closets were due for a radical reinvention, and Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible set of products known to man, and here's why. Rhone helps you get ready for any occasion with the commuter collection, which offers the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, quarter zips, and polos. You never have to worry about what to wear when you have the Rhone commuter collection. And here's some anecdote. I'm wearing my Rhone pants right now. And last week I was at a wedding. I wore my Rhone button-down shirt to the wedding at a formal wedding. And I will also wear it tomorrow when I just, go into a coffee shop to have a meeting. It's that versatile. So it's time to feel confident without the hassle. With Rhone's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the products. It's that easy. Yeah, I actually, not so neatly folded that shirt in my bag for the wedding, and I was able to take it out, and automatically I was able to put it on. It looked like I had ironed it, but I didn't. It's an inside secret between us. So with Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll also be smelling fresh and clean all day. On top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can dish the dry cleaner all together. We're on the move a lot, and the Rhone commuter collection has never let me down. The versatility and overall comfort of the collection is undefeated. I absolutely love it. And even after I wear it all day, I feel super fresh because that Gold Fusion anti-odor technology. At that wedding, I was dancing up a storm, wore it, no problems. So the commuter collection can get you through any work day and straight into whatever comes next. So head to Rhone.com/majority and use the promo code majority to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to RHONE.com/majority and use the code majority. It's time to find your corner office comfort. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs and gives you tailored advice to improve your nutrition, workout, sleep, and even stress management. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism and whether you're burning mostly fats or carbs. And then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. You could also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time. And Lumen will give you tips to keep on top of your health game. This is really important. I've been running this fitness community for years, and often what I hear from people is, my metabolism is X, my metabolism is Y. But this actually gives you the data to actually confirm or in some ways challenge some assumptions you have about your body. And because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does, optimal metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness levels, better sleep, and it could track your cycle as well as the onset of menopause and adjust your recommendations to keep your metabolism healthy through hormonal shifts so you can keep up your energy and stave off cravings. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/majority to get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/majority for 15% off your purchase. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. All right. Well, I think we can kind of tackle this next part together, which is why not Shapiro, but also I have a theory that I haven't heard described in many places about Walz and the power of Walz. There are a couple of things about Shapiro that one could say made a difference here. There's what the initial reporting suggested, which was the Israel-Palestine stuff. And on the one hand, his positions were not much different than a lot of the other people, including Walz. But in looking at his background, he has a connection to the state of Israel that a lot of these folks don't have. He spent a lot of time there. He proposed to his wife there. He had done some stuff with the military and did volunteer work and some work with the government. Do I think that's disqualifying? No, but that maybe like
in this moment, it may have been a factor.
Could have elevated it. He also he's honestly said some pointed things about Netanyahu. He's praised Netanyahu in the past and before. He's criticized him recently, but has praised him in ways that could get him into trouble. He's made some pointed points about the protesters, etc. Not necessarily things that I think are necessarily wrong, but that maybe they didn't want to have that discussion right now, the Harris campaign. I think that I don't think that's actually what it was, but I do think that there was a valid discussion to be had about whether that was the conversation that the Harris campaign wanted to have. I think that's one. I think two is that this is the recent reporting, you alluded to this before, that apparently when they were interviewing Shapiro, he was asking reasonable questions like, what is the role of the vice president, yada, yada, yada. And Walz was like, yes, sign me up. I don't care. They apparently asked him, do you want to be the person in the room before major decisions are made? And his answer was, only if she wants me to. Which I think, as somebody who's Vice President Harris, is like, that's the right answer. I don't want leaks 2 years into my presidency about how I'm undermining Josh Shapiro. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The right answer is, I'm here to help the ball club.
Right. Yeah. So I think those things made somewhat of a difference. I would say two other things here that stood out to me. One was, in looking at Shapiro's record, there was so much that he has done that is very impressive. But there, along the way, as one accumulates in politics, there were plenty of people who did not have flattering things to say about him. Fetterman has been reportedly undermining him with the Harris team, which is not a small thing. That one of two senators from your state, the guy who got elected statewide the same year you have, has been basically trashing you behind the scenes.
They apparently have a history on the parole board where they disagreed on some things.
Yes. Now, I have some questions for Fetterman about whether this is really what he wants to be doing, but it's not a great look for anybody involved personally. Like watching this, I don't think this helps anybody, but that could make a difference. There were other people in Shapiro's background, including previous mentors, who felt like he'd stabbed them in the back. And it reminds me of this really bad movie, Draft Day. Have you seen Draft Day?
It is a great bad movie. It's one of those bad movies that you're like, this movie's not good, but I'm going to watch it again. There's a couple of scenes that are so watchable. Anyway, we could go.
It reminds me of the Bo Callahan phenomenon. Now, I actually, for the record, I'm not sold that any of this is actually true about Shapiro, but I wonder whether in the Harris campaign, they were like, well, maybe there's like some like intangible leadership issues with Shapiro. And,
you know what? Well, not to interrupt you, but I think what that means is, because it was a truncated selection timeline, it is probably the kind of thing that on a normal vetting process timeline, they'd have been able to run all that stuff to ground, decide whether any of it had any merit. Most likely would have found that none of it had any merit. But on a truncated timeline, you don't have that luxury.
It's just, you have to go on gut, right? Just like with the Costner character, I won't spoil the movie, but basically he's like, there's this one pick he's supposed to make. You could say that's a Shapiro pick. Everybody wants him to make the pick. All the numbers point to this one person, and he winds up,
That's such a fun movie. I'm going to watch that again.
And it's like, that's what it reminded me of. It's like, well, maybe that was going on. But one thing that's underrated in this whole thing, which I think speaks to a vulnerability of Shapiro that I'm sympathetic to because I share his opinions on the issue. It's somewhat. And then what I think is a strength of Walz politically is education stuff. So Shapiro is pro-voucher and pro-ESA and pro-charter. Now, for people listening, some of you may know what I'm talking about or not knowing about, but charter schools, which I ran a charter school, is a nonprofit for the most part, unless you live in a couple of states that allow for-profit. But for the most part, it's nonprofit institutions that run public schools that are accountable to local school boards or the states, right? Democrats have a long history of some Democrats supporting those, including Barack Obama, Arne Duncan, Bill Clinton, Cory Booker, that is generally accepted politics within the Democratic Party, right? Like there are disagreements and all that. But Shapiro is pro-voucher and ESA in certain limited.
What is ESA?
ESAs are education savings accounts, which are
right. Okay.
They are growing dramatically in red states right now, where they're passing bills where, and I've done a lot of work on this over the past 2 years, where in certain states like Arizona, Florida, etc., you could take your money out of the system, put it in these education savings accounts, and homeschool your kids with public dollars in some of these places. It is a controversial area. If you live in an area like this, it's actually a humongous deal. And in Texas, there's been an intra-Republican fight where the governor took out a bunch of Republicans who opposed ESA expansion in rural areas. These are districts with very few students. They're passing these bills. They're about to pass a bill in Texas to allow students to take the dollars and think of Dillon, Texas, Friday Night Lights, and send it to a private school or homeschool their kids. This is going to create tremendous pressure on rural school districts. Why am I talking about this? Well, Shapiro being for a version of that, a very limited version of that, obviously would create some issues within Democratic politics. But more importantly, Walz is one of the few Democrats who's been talking about this issue. He went on Ezra Klein's podcast and was like, I don't hear Democrats talking about this. He was like, if you live in a district, he literally said this last week. He said, if you live in a district with 400 people, this is going to be a problem for your district. This is meaningful to me because I've been talking to these people. I actually have a strong relationship with Republican and right-wing figures who've been pushing these bills. And I said to them, I texted you, I was at like a big right-wing institution a couple months ago talking to them about this issue. And I said to them, I was like, look, you guys, this is the one path to you guys losing rural votes. Like, it's hard for me to imagine, given the identity politics stuff going on in America, that you will truly ever lose the rural vote in my lifetime. But if there is a path to lose it, this is it. And I think
it's that and cutting rural hospitals, which is the other move they're doing.
Yeah, you could start to imagine like the narrative here. And Walz senses this too, and he talks about it. So long way of saying this is, I think, an important difference between him and other Democrats, not just Shapiro.
So, okay, with that said, let's prepare our audience for the two emerging and most likely areas of attack on this pick. Let's start. You want to brief us on the anti-Semitism thing, and we'll talk about that. And then I'll go into the military record stuff, and I'll talk about that. So start with the anti-Semitism.
And to be clear, like nobody's arguing that Walz is anti-Semitic, but I'll quote Stephen Miller here. He has a tweet, says, buzz growing that Biden regrets caving to the coup after Kamala seismically botched the VP pick by surrendering to the Jew haters. She showed tremendous cowardice, exiling Shapiro for a socialist, and Biden is fuming that he let donors extort him out by freezing his campaign funds. Now,
let's stipulate first that Stephen Miller has no sources whatsoever on the left, or even friends anymore on the left. So
yeah, I'm sure Biden's sourcing Stephen Miller here, but the amount of exaggeration in that tweet is not worth discussing. But even Van Jones went on CNN and was like, he said anti-Semitism is marbled into the Democratic Party. And look, like I want to say out of the outright that there is anti-Semitism on the left. I suspect there's probably more on the right, but it exists in America. It exists on the left. It exists on the right. You and I have talked about it on this podcast before. I don't think that's what's going on here. I certainly haven't seen any evidence of it. And I think that, and what I mentioned before, before I gave my assessment of if you do think the Israel-Palestine issue played a part, to me, I think it played a part that has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. I don't think it has to do with Shapiro's Jewish identity. I think that it has to do with the things he said, if it mattered at all, and his relationship to a country that right now is very controversial, right? I don't think his Jewish identity does the work there because Bernie Sanders is also a Jew, and I don't think one would say any of those things about him. And again, I don't think any of those things are disqualifying. I'm just thinking that if it did play a part, I think the Harris team might have felt like that would have kicked up a conversation they didn't want to have right now. I actually don't think that's what it was, though. And then just one more of these crazy tweets. Eric Erickson tweeted, the Senate Majority Leader, Eric Erickson tweeted something about this anti-Semitism stuff and saying that, basically He says no Jews are allowed at the top of the Democratic Party. Schumer tweeted back, news to me. And then there was a great community note on Twitter that said the Senate Majority Leader, Secretaries of State, Treasury, Homeland Security, Attorney General, Director of National Intelligence, and the husband of the 2024 presidential nominee are all Jewish. So I think this is real. I also want to acknowledge we got.
I like, by the way, how the right can't decide whether Jews run everything or aren't allowed to run anything. Like, depends on the week.
Yeah, and I also want to say, like, there are a lot of people in my life, and you could be one of them, like, who are Jewish, who felt bummed out that Shapiro didn't get this pick, and felt bummed out by what they felt was an unfair yardstick used for him. And I know a lot of people feel that way. And I get it. I totally get it. But I don't think that drove Harris's calculus.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. I don't feel that way at all. But yeah, I think it is important to note that the right now wants to drive a wedge by saying Harris is anti-Semitic. Harris, who is married to a Jewish man, is anti-Semitic because she didn't choose the Jewish guy. Like, right. And it's important to know that that's out there, and we have to navigate around it. And the simple way to navigate around it is exactly what you just described. It's like that they can't decide whether George Soros runs the Democratic Party or whether we don't allow Jews to be in the Democratic Party. So, I mean, I think that would be how so somehow George Soros is in charge of everything, but Jews are in charge of nothing. That's how I would respond to that. Now, what I think is a more immediately like a greater threat, I'm not going to consider it a threat, but a greater potential threat to the Walz pick is the potential swift voting of Tim Walz. And we've started to see it. An hour ago, J.D. Vance gave a speech where he said that Tim Walz was pretending to be something he wasn't. And then he said, you know, when I was in the Marine Corps and they asked me to go to Iraq, I went. And so I want to lay out what they're talking about, and it's important. What they're talking about, their argument, is that Tim Walz decided to retire from the National Guard when his unit was being sent to Iraq. Now, the first thing I want to say is that argument is not altogether untrue. Okay, it is. When you put it that way, it's not fair. But if you just say those facts, it is circumstantially correct. And so I want to lay this out. I think it's important that people understand Tim Walz's military background. The first thing I would say is it is important to note that Tim Walz is not running as General Patton. He is not out there leading with his military background. He is not holding himself out to be something that he is not. He has been, anytime anybody has asked him, from what I can tell about his military background, he's been very forthcoming with the idea that he never deployed to a combat zone, that kind of thing. So let's walk through what Tim Walz did in the military, and let's talk about his exit from the military. I want to say, first of all, Tim Walz is one of the only people in this whole Veep stakes I've never met, to my knowledge. So this is not from a conversation with him. This is just me being interested in looking this up. Okay, so Tim Walz was, and this is notable, he enlisted, was not an officer, enlisted in the military the year I was born, 1981, right? So this is not a guy who was clearly doing it for politics. He was 17 years old. His dad had been in the Army, and his dad said, hey, I think this would be good for you. You should go do it. And by the way, 1981, we're not trying to avoid a draft. Right? This is just a kid coming out of high school who thought this would probably be good for me to do. So that's what he did. He rose up through the ranks. Even after he got his degree, at no point did Tim Walz choose to go become an officer, which would pay more, a lot of people choose to go the officer route. He became a very senior non-commissioned officer. He was basically, the scale goes from E1 to E9. He made it to E8. And then at E8, he was given the opportunity when he was a master sergeant to become actually a command sergeant major, like sergeant major of his battalion, which is a huge deal. It is the head enlisted troop of the battalion. He accepted it. He got the rank. He was supposed to go to the school for it. And right around this time, we're talking 2004, 2005, is when his unit got deployment orders. Now, so in that way, it is true that he chose, after I think 26 years, something like that, in the military, in the Guard, to retire, which is a very full career. and therefore did not retire with that E9, that sergeant major rank. He had to retire with the E8 rank. That is all true. Now, what the other details that people need to know, because I looked this up, are one, that in 2003, he did deploy for a few months. His unit was sent to Italy. Now, that sounds like, oh, he got a cush deployment. I bet you that Tim Walz wanted to go be in a more consequential deployment, because I was joining the military at that point. That's what we all wanted to do. But the National Guard in those early years was not, for the most part, being used for those deployments. The National Guard at that point was backfilling active duty missions, peacekeeping or peacetime type missions, where they still needed people to go do those things. And so I think he was deployed to Italy, and that's what most Guard units were doing in that period of time. Now, the other thing is that I looked it up. His first child was born in 2001. His second child, or 2002 maybe, his second child was born in 2005. Okay, so what that means, and then people say he left the military and he left the National Guard and he ran for Congress. So I am sure that his decision to change his career and go on a more political path may have had something to do with him, after a very successful career that was mostly far before 9/11, deciding he had done enough. But I also expect that it probably had a little to do with the fact that he had already been on the other side of the ocean for the military for several months, while he and his wife had a 2-year-old at home. And now, and according to what I read, they were on this fertility journey. They had not had the easiest time having kids. Now they were really trying hard to have a second child. And this guy who had been in the military for over 20 years was faced with what I imagine was probably a very difficult decision for him, which was whether or not to go to Iraq with his unit or go ahead and call it a career, which he was probably circling anyway at that point, and focus on having a family. And so I just think people need to know that, because even me, like, if all you tell me is that this guy was a senior non-commissioned officer in his unit and his unit was going to Iraq and he didn't go and he called it a career, even me, if that's the only information I have, a lot of vets are going to be like, I'd like to know more about that. And so I want people to know what the more about that is, because I think that context is important. And I think as long as Tim Walz does what I fully expect he will do, which is just be really candid about that, I think people are going to find that very relatable and understandable.
Yeah, I mean, that's I first of all, I didn't even realize that it was out there.
Yeah, they're leaning into it right now. By the way, it's also important that, I'll say this for JD Vance too, the idea of a vice president who was an enlisted soldier or Marine is a good thing. We haven't had things like that, and particularly for somebody like Walz who made it to sergeant major for a time. That's a big deal. Like, that is a big deal, and it is very different from other kinds of military leadership.
Let's quickly talk about Trump before we go. He has been anything but on message.
Yeah.
He appeared in Georgia and, was pushing a message about the middle class. And here's what he was saying. Let's go to the clip.
So I did these 2 big rallies, and he won. He did win. He won by like 2%. And his wife looked at me and said, "Thank you, sir. We'll never, ever be able to repay you for what you did. You got my husband the nomination, and then we beat somebody who was unbeatable." She was, in theory, unbeatable. She was the hottest politician in the country at the time. Democrat politician, I would say I was hotter because I was president. So I was hotter now. I'm only kidding, Marjorie. I'm only kidding. Although maybe I'm not kidding, actually. No, she was like the hottest, certainly the hottest Democrat politician in the country. And she was going wild for years. She's still going wild. She can't even believe it. But I got him by doing massive rallies. And I really worked hard. He's the most disloyal guy I think I've ever seen. But think of the wife. We can never repay you for what you've done, sir. We could have never won. And now she said 2 weeks ago that I will not endorse him because he hasn't earned my endorsement. I haven't earned her endorsement. I have nothing to do with her. Somewhere he went bad. And you know what? Your numbers in Georgia are very average. Your crime numbers, your economic numbers, all of your numbers, you're very average. You can do a lot better, and you'll do a lot better with a better governor. You can do a lot better, just so you understand.
I mean, that sounds like he's shown up to campaign for Brian Kemp's opponent.
Yes, that was a strong hit in his campaign to win the governor's primary in Georgia. But I'm not sure it was a great hit for his presidential campaign. Kemp has 63% approval rating, but let's pretend he was unpopular. What the hell is this? Like, what is this? What does it even do for his campaign? It makes you wonder whether he's trying to win, which was the subject of a Washington Post op-ed from somebody from the National Review, of all people, who wrote, "We may well look back and conclude that the apex of the Trump campaign was about 20 minutes into his convention speech before Trump decided to wing it and segue into thoughts on the Green Bay Packers and his now trademark reference to the late Hannibal Lecter. The GOP convention feels like a decade ago, and Trump's survival of an assassination attempt feels like a lifetime ago."
So let me just play a little amateur psychologist on Trump here. Donald Trump doesn't like to be in any fight he is not winning.
Yeah.
So when he was running against Joe Biden, he was having a great time. And he was quite on message because the feedback, the vibe he was getting back from the audience, the feeling of winning and being in front was lovely. And he wanted to hit that dopamine button over and over again. As soon as he finds himself in an even battle or even a little behind potentially, he doesn't want anything to do with it. He doesn't want to debate Kamala Harris. He doesn't really even want to talk about her much. He doesn't want to talk about any of that. So what does he do? Let's see, who can I pivot to where I can get that dopamine feeling? Oh, I can punch down on the governor of Georgia while I'm in his state, and I can try and settle some score and some grievance that I'm upset about. So all these pundits who constantly try and assign keen political strategies to the decisions that Trump makes, no, he's just chasing dopamine most of the time.
Right. And I'll mention one more tweet here. It's from my friend Isaac Saul from Tangle. He said, Donald Trump is calling Kamala, spent 20 minutes hammering Republican Brian Kemp when he was in Georgia and is incessantly complaining that he's no longer running against Biden. Harris-Walz are talking about abortion, gun control, free meals for kids, and cheap health care. So I think that's right. And obviously there's the National Association of Black Journalists remarks from last week where Trump veered into like, this whole territory. I'm sure everybody's familiar with it now about, Kamala is now acting black. She basically recently turned black. It's not even worth getting into it other than to say like that didn't accomplish anything. It's not, there's no real strategy behind it. People were
anybody who ever says that, by the way, just be like, she went to Howard.
Right. It's crazy. It's just also so crazy. And they're squandering the limited attention they have right now. Because the other thing that Trump is not used to is not being the center of attention. And right now, we talked about this last time, right? You have the VP choice. This whole week is dominated by it. You have the convention next week. Imagine that week's going to be dominated by that. Trump has said he's not showing up to the debates, so he's forfeited that. And then he's going to have to go for sentencing. So he doesn't have a great calendar in front of him. The one chance he had, I guess he could still do it, is to dump JD Vance, although that pressure seems to be waning. And I think that seems highly unlikely.
Now I think he has to, because if they want to attack Tim Walz's military background, they have to have JD Vance in order to do it. Because certainly a guy with 5 deferments can't do it.
Right. Yeah. That would be Walz's obvious reply, right? If he were in that debate. Now, on the other hand, I want to mention one thing that I've seen from the Trump camp.
Well, actually, before you do that, can I say something about this whole mispronunciation of her name deal?
Yeah.
Look, we know what it is. It's a racist dog whistle. We know all that. But I also think that it is something that people listening to this can bring up in a way to go on offense, to talk about the difference between the two parties. And it is this, is that while they pretend that they can't figure out how to pronounce the first name of the woman who has been vice president of the United States for the last 4 years, which is obviously an attempt to other her, instead of just leaning into the idea that like they're racist because they're trying to other her. That's true. But I think there's a decency divide here between the two parties, because Vivek Ramaswamy had 15 minutes in the spotlight. He was the guy for 15 minutes. And at no point did we really ever think he was going to be a consequential actor in this election. But we all learned how to say Vivek Ramaswamy. And It was, and not for any reason other than We thought it was like important. We didn't agree with anything the guy said. We didn't like the guy, but we have enough respect for human beings to not try to make a joke out of their name, but instead try and actually learn how to say it, to show respect for other people of his heritage. That to me is a big difference in the decency divide.
Agreed. And I think it's also like the best way to handle the pronoun debate, right? Which is like, I think like there's a whole world of what people like how people handle that discussion, and how new it is to certain people, especially older people, and how it could be scary to them, or where they feel judged, yada yada yada. The best way I've ever heard people talk about it is, no matter what you believe and how confused you might be about the debate, generally speaking, when people ask you to refer to them a certain way, I have a church next to me. I think people can hear the bells. When people ask you to refer to them a certain way, you tend to try your best to refer to them a certain way. That is just how it is. Like, that's how society works, how they pronounce their name, whether it's Miss, Mrs., Ms., whatever. Like, you refer to people the way they prefer to be referred to. And that's generally how it goes. Now, on the Trump front, there's one thing we need to keep an eye on here, which I imagine is coming less from Trump himself than from his campaign, but the words are coming out of his mouth, is this tax situation. So he's been floating all these random tax proposals, not taxing tips, not taxing Social Security benefits. Obviously, he's been floating tax cuts for the wealthy. These are totally impractical and would bankrupt the United States government, but they are making a difference. A good example is the tip one, where both Democratic senators from Nevada have jumped on board with these proposals because there's so many people who make money off of tips in Nevada. We should keep an eye on this phenomenon because I actually think it's important.
Yeah, but this is the thing. It's just throw whatever people want to hear. Just throw it out there. He doesn't have to understand it. He just throw it out there, make it sound good. And so, yeah, people have to be prepared to talk about those things. So maybe on a future episode, we can get into those more and be able to help people break it down. All right. Do you want to talk briefly about the RFK Jr. stuff?
I think it's just, we don't have to play the clip, but he put a video out, say, I forget what the tagline was he put on the video, but it was basically like now, like, I would love to see the New Yorker try to spin this. And like, most people had no idea what the hell he was talking about. So you watch the video and he tells a story about hiding a bear in Central Park after he was on some kind of hunting trip, and he was like at Peter Luger's steakhouse, and he had to go somewhere, and so he had to get rid of this bear, and he made it look like it was hit by a car. And like, anybody watching it, and he was talking to Roseanne Barr in the video, and I'm like, what the hell is going on with this guy? And so I don't think there's much to talk about other than like this bizarre sideshow of RFK is getting sadder and sadder by the day. I'll read you some numbers from Axios. They said that recent polling shows Kennedy's support in the single digits. He was receiving as much as 15% in some polls earlier this year. He had been relying on double haters to fuel his bid, but with Vice President Harris entry into the race, the voters dissatisfied with both candidates may be declining. He's also running out of money. So he's in trouble. And a lot of the polls that I've seen recently, a lot of them are showing him taking more support from Trump than from Harris right now. And there was a leaked audio of him basically coordinating with Trump, trying to get out of the race. And there was like reporting that he was basically, they're negotiating some kind of like position. RFK had to apologize for that. It's an interesting turn of events here.
It makes sense, right? Because I have to imagine there are more disaffected Republicans than there are disaffected Democrats right now.
Yeah.
And so, that makes sense to me. So that's great news. I mean, bad for the bear, good for the rest of us.
Just like, it's crazy to think about. And this wasn't long ago. Like the guy was.
It was like a year ago or something, right?
The guy's fully an adult. I think it was definitely within the past decade or something like that. Like he is older than you or I are right now, hiding a bear in Central Park. It's crazy. Like somebody texted me the other day to say like, this guy would be a funny, eclectic American story if it wasn't for the fact he was running for president. Like he's just like such a weirdo, which is why I think he'll garner a few percentage of just like internet eclectic types who are just like, I like this guy's varied and, diverse background. I think once you start looking into his actual views, you might feel otherwise, but yeah.
All right. So basically, to sum it up, things are exciting. Things are good. We're going to try hard to keep things exciting and good. Ravi, what's new with you?
I'm over in Santa Barbara for a month in California. And I don't know if have you ever been to Santa Barbara?
Probably, but I don't know. They keep a lot of people who give money there. So I probably had to spend some political time there.
Yeah, I think U.S. News World Reports calls it the most beautiful, the best weather in America, and it is 75 every day and sunny. When I got here, there were like a few clouds in the sky, and everybody was apologizing to me for the clouds. I'm like, it's all right. But no, I'm just hanging out here for a month because I had long ago Airbnb'd my apartment in New York, so I had to get out of there. But it's incredible. It's really nice. Yeah, that's all I have to say. But how's everything in your world?
Everything is really good. We are about 2/3 of the way through a 10-day stretch where Diana is mostly out of town. And so, I'm just getting by as trying to be super dad as best I can. Today we had a fun thing happen, which is this morning, True's see if everybody can follow this. For those who don't know, I still play baseball, like not softball, but actual baseball, which is important to this story. My son is real into baseball. True's coach, whose job it's like a club team, very serious team. So that one of the guys who runs the club program and is a professional baseball coach, much younger than me, is also on my baseball team. And so today is like this all-encompassing baseball day for me and True. This morning, we went for a hitting lesson where it's a 1-hour lesson, and it's just literally, his name is Nate, Coach Nate, coaching True and coaching me, and us getting to like compete against each other. And then tonight, True will bat boy while I play center field, and Nate is is pitching. And then day after tomorrow, True starts a tournament where Nate will be coaching. So it's just like, and I felt a little silly about it because I was like saying to Nate, I was like, it's kind of funny. My almost 11-year-old and I have the same coach, and he goes, and Nate's just like a really smart, wise, great guy. And he goes, man, when I was his age, when I was going to my coaches, if my dad were still playing and we were doing it together, I'd have thought that was pretty awesome. And I was like, yeah, that is pretty awesome. Like it's like a really, in the theme of where we started, where I talked about Tim Walz being the most Midwestern of dads. Here is my submission for most Midwestern or dad-ish of things is that experience this morning. That was quite fun.
Yeah. Well, okay. I'm wondering when Bella's going to start playing some sports.
This coming year, tennis and softball.
She seems strong. I mean, for the limited knowledge I have of babies, she seemed like a fairly strong character. I actually have one little story to add to this. You just reminded me of something. So when I get to Santa Barbara, I go to this CrossFit gym. This is like a minor feel-good story. And I just work out the day I get here because I'd left at 4 a.m. from New York. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to get a workout in. This woman who's like the CrossFit coach is at the CrossFit gym. Everybody's super nice to me. I walk across town to walk home. When I walk through this park where there are unhoused people, like what we previously called homeless people, like a group of them. And I'm like, what? The woman who is the CrossFit coach is sitting amongst all the homeless people. Just this random woman I just seen 30 minutes before. And she's just having a conversation with all these people, these unhoused people. I don't know what the context was, but it was one of these weird disorienting moments where I'm like, that is just heartwarming. I have no idea what's going on and what possibly could happen, but it was just like, I was like, wow, you don't see something like that every day.
Are you going back to that CrossFit gym?
Yes, I am a member of it now.
I think that me and the audience, I think we would like to know what was going on.
Well, it's a good corollary to the story of the guy who spit at me, right? I want you to know that there's like a lot of different ways that you can, like different things you see on the streets, right? So I want to report back that there's a totally different kind of side of the unhoused.
Different coast, different sort of story. All right, since we're doing a longer one for us, let me add another heartwarming story that is not about me, that is an update to about one of our guests that we've had. So people have who've been listening for a while may remember that J.D. Scholten, who's a state legislator in Iowa, has come on the show and talked about rural monopolies, and he's very articulate about it. People should Google this extremely feel-good story, which is, for those who don't know, J.D. Scholten is also a former professional baseball player. He, for all intents and purposes, retired in 2007 from baseball, but has dabbled here and there. Still plays recreationally. Actually, has pitched on my team in the past. JD, about a month ago, got a call from the minor league baseball team in Sioux City, which he represents, where they were like, "Hey, we've had 2 pitchers go down with injury. Do you think you could come in and just throw a few innings for us tonight? Just all you got to do is throw some strikes. Like, we probably won't win, but we just need somebody. We don't have anybody to pitch." And JD at this point was like a beer and a half in. He was at a festival. He was shaking hands, doing his politician thing. And he's like, "Yeah, okay." So JD, who is 44 years old, shows up, throws 6 2/3 innings, allows 2 hits, gets the win, becomes in that moment the 5th oldest person in history to record a professional win as a pitcher. All right. Makes it into the starting rotation, is now pitching for the Sioux City Explorers, in addition to being, he's 44, in addition to being a member of the state legislature in Iowa. Recently, the Baseball Hall of Fame called him and asked if they could have his game-worn hat from that first game, which is now going to Cooperstown because he is the 5th oldest person in history to pitch and get a win in a professional game. Last night, JD came down and pitched against the minor league team here, the Kansas City Monarchs, and let me know about it ahead of time, and some other people. So myself and True and a few of my teammates on the Kansas City Hustlers who he had pitched for, we all went to the game, and I was there. I got to help call an inning on the Sioux City broadcast, and talk about JD. He didn't have the greatest performance last night, but he did pitch the whole game, and he's 44 years old. And we joke on our team, we're like, there are some former pros on the Kansas City Hustlers. JD is the first to turn pro. And now all of us in our 30s and 40s think there's hope for us and we'll be discovered.
Well, shout out to JD. He's a member of the of my fitness group. And actually, good timing. We're about to start a new season. So if folks are out there want to join our little fitness process, you can go to joinsquadra.com. Yeah, it's good. We're about to start in a couple of weeks. So yeah, he's maybe it's all those deadlifts he's been doing.
Must be, man. 44 years old and he's still painting the corners at 87 miles an hour. It's pretty impressive. So, all right. Thanks everybody for listening. If you want to find more of this wholesome goodness, you can find us on social media. It's at Jason Kander or at Ravi M. Gupta, please leave a 5-star review. Thank you, Midas Mighty. And remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.